How about you take a minute and introduce yourself? We kind of started, then we ran into that technical difficulty, but
Of course.
why
So
don't you tell everybody
first
about
off,
yourself for
everyone,
a
thank
minute?
you for joining. I know that we had some technical difficulties, 2 hours to hop on an Instagram live, but that's technology these days. We are at the whims of the robots. So to introduce myself, my name's Adela Cojab. Some of you guys might know me, but if you don't, my family's Syrian Lebanese. And when they left Syria and Lebanon, instead of going to Brooklyn, they went to Mexico. And that's where I was born. And in 2001, I moved to Deal, New Jersey. I went to Hillel Yeshiva, K through 12. It was a great experience, and I talk about it a lot, the importance of a Sephardic Jewish education. And then I went to NYU. I'll tell the story super, super short. At NYU, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. It started with your typical BDS that you see across college campuses, but it escalated to pictures of Jewish students being posted on social media, which we're actually seeing right now at Northeastern, to boycotting and protesting all of the events that we throw, to 53 groups boycotting the group I was president of, 70 professors boycotting Israeli academics, this student government and faculty council trying to boycott NYU's Tel Aviv campus. And it all kind of snowballed into the Yom HaTzmaut celebration, where instead of it being a beautiful event, it started with a student lighting an Israeli flag on fire and pouring gasoline on it. And then another student took the microphone from a Jewish girl singing Hatikvah, started yelling Free Palestine. And then they took our other flags, tore them to shreds, and hung them from trees. Ultimately, the school, instead of doing something about it, gave an award to the group that was doing this. And I got in touch with lawyers. I decided to sue NYU for anti-Semitism. At the time, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act didn't include anti-Semitism as a form of discrimination, and I can explain more about that in Q&A. And ultimately, I filed for publicity reasons, but my case made it up to the White House. President Trump had heard about it. He invited me to speak at a conference with him in Miami. And after I spoke with him 3 days later, he expanded the definition of Judaism, thereby would fall under Title VI, protecting Jews on a national level on every college campus. Since then, I worked as an activist professionally for 2 years under Sheldon Adelson, hard to say, Sheldon Adelson, Ela Hashalom. And after that, I decided to go to law school. Now I'm at Cardozo School of Law, and I still do a lot of advocacy work, a lot of activism. I've been very active on Instagram, and I'm really happy to be here today.
Great. Thank you for joining us, and also for all your activism and contribution to the SCA. Yeah, you came to our boot campus 3-day intensive retreat for high school seniors, where we prepare them for the inevitable clash with some of these ideas on campus. I feel like the last few years we were in a little kind of private club about this issue. Like, I think there were a bunch of people that knew about it, but it wasn't as understood as it is today about what a widespread problem it really is. But the young adults, the high school seniors, were always very inspired by your personal story and by your activism, and it gives them a sense of empowerment and the idea that they can make a change if they want, if they're inclined to do that. And I think it's important that they see role models like yourself from our community, strong people standing up for Israel and advocating for their rights, human rights, their rights as Jews here. And you've done tremendous work. So the last time we had it, we've spoken many times on a few different issues along the way, but the last time we did an Instagram Live was May 2021, the last time missiles were headed towards Israel, over 4,000 rockets fired by Hamas. And the title of our talk, I think, was Missiles, Media, and Misinformation, right? And I would say that that was the first time we saw a kind of a full explosion of hate on social media directed towards Jews, which was pretty bad at the time. What's going on today makes that time seem like maybe the good old days. I'm not sure, right? Something's much more serious about it this time. And I was wondering, you being in this space and understanding it very well and being active yourself there, how do you reconcile that? What is going on this time that's different than last time? And last time was pretty bad on its own.
What's
happening?
It's a good question. Actually, I didn't even think of last time, and we did hop on this live. Last time, though, if you remember, it was because there had been, I think, Palestinian homes demolished in a certain neighborhood, Sheikh Jarrah, that's what it was. So if anything, there you can argue again, we debunked this all the way back in 2021 as to why it wasn't the case, but we had the
Bella
Hadid
Hadid
meme, but like there you could have at least
right.
maybe said, well, Israel started it, right? Who instigated it? You could say, well, Israel took an
Mm-hmm.
action and Palestinians were responding.
Right.
That's something I can maybe understand. But what happened here was an unprovoked ambush by Hamas onto the people of Israel. And you saw people celebrating it before Israel even retaliated.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing, actually, Dr. Sheila Nazarian posted the day it happened, on October 7th, she posted, if you're not condemning the horrific attacks that just took place, then do not complain when Israel defends itself. And I posted that 3 days in a row after October 7th because I knew that the narrative was about to flip. You already had people, before Israel's retaliation,
Mm-hmm.
people were already saying the attack was justified, number one. And number two, they
Mm-hmm.
were already celebrating it, saying that this was an act of resistance, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what was that? Let's just stop there for a second before. I don't think the level of hatred is surprising to us, right? I think we've been piped into this for a while. But what is surprising to me, and I'm wondering if it's surprising to you, is that within 24 hours of it happening and before Israel even retaliated, that wasn't protesting, that was celebrating. Even just from a tactical perspective, I don't know what they were thinking. In a way, it kind of helps unmask them for what they really believe. But what do you think the thinking is on that? Can they just not what's going on there?
Again, I wish I had an answer at all. What I will tell you is that I'm in no way surprised at all. Why? Because if you look at what's been happening on college campuses specifically, it's been years of indoctrination and it's been years of extremism. And I tell this story pretty often because it is shocking. And again, it's a true story. I took a class in Middle Eastern affairs and Middle Eastern history at NYU. And I knew that there'd be a class on Israel-Palestine. It was all the way at the end of the semester, a 12-week course. And I was like, okay, like I know probably I'm going to become public enemy number one when it comes to that unit. But unit number 4 or 5 was about 9/11. And we get a reading about Osama bin Laden, and I'm reading it, and it's talking about how he wasn't a religious extremist. He was actually a computer engineer who wanted social change. So he used religion as a vehicle to mobilize people for justice. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, okay, but he was a terrorist, right? So I'm thinking, okay, we're going to get to class and we're going to talk about how religion can be mobilized and used for dangerous ways, right? Dangerous things that people can use it as an ideology, mobilize people, mobilize the masses, especially people who are less educated, in order to celebrate atrocities. And I get to class, and instead of talking about that, they're basically regurgitating the article about how he was a computer engineer and he wasn't a religious extremist. And I actually had to raise my hand in class and say, but he was a terrorist, right? And all the other students rolled their eyes and kind of scoffed. And the professor, arms crossed, said, yeah, I'm sure that's what some people would call him. And I was like, we're in NYU. We're 30 blocks from what used to be the World Trade Center, right? So it was one of those things that was like the first time in my life I realized this is not about Israel Palestine. This is about indoctrination that's so much bigger, so much bigger than anything there. Like it really is. It's not just this. It's an indoctrination that's been on all college campuses. So naturally, if for the last 3-4 years, the only thing that you've been learning about, be it in your dance class, in your film class, in any class, is about Palestinian oppression, when the Palestinians stand up for themselves, of course they're going to be out in the streets celebrating it. And they weren't even thinking, most people weren't even thinking about the retaliation. I'm thinking about on October 8th, Times Square filled with people celebrating Palestine. And again, this wasn't about Palestinian solidarity. This was about Palestinian celebration before retaliation. So anyone who right now is pointing out Israeli aggression, this, whatever, it's like, bro, if you were celebrating October 7th before the retaliation, I have no reason to start this conversation with you. It has nowhere else to go. And again, it's not surprising. It's indoctrination.
Right. And yeah, I think you're right. And I think that a lot of the groups that you see out along with them really speaks to the extent of the indoctrination across this whole intersectional map. It was almost like they feel Hamas struck a blow on behalf of marginalized people all over the planet, whatever marginalized group they think they're in, that they were kind of there is this unholy alliance between this extremist leftist movements that capture all the marginalized groups, and Israel as a representative of this oppressor, which couldn't be further from the truth.
I was listening to a lecture, and they said something interesting, because they said, well, why would Hamas do this? There's two different theories, and I just got back from a trip, and I'll tell you the theory that we learned about on the trip, which is separate, and it's backed by facts. But this one was interesting. They said that Hamas at this point, they knew that the attack on Israel, what were they planning to do? Wipe out Israel? Hamas knows that Gaza is Gaza. It wasn't going to work, right? So it was all about getting Israel to respond. And holding the hostages is all about getting Israel to respond. And it was all about the international presence. Their purpose was fear-mongering, and their purpose was PR, end of the day. And a regular person would look at that and say, you're going to kill innocent civilians, storm a music festival, villages, while people are sleeping on a Saturday morning at 6:30 a.m. And that's your PR strategy? But now taking a step back, and you realize their PR strategy worked. And that's bizarre. That's the crazy thing.
Yes, it's true. And I think it works because, like you said, there's been this indoctrination going on really for 30 years. I remember when I was in college, it was really just beginning. And I started to get those professors that were believing and saying certain things. And I was like, wow, that's really off. That's not right. That's a moral equivalence. That doesn't make sense. But it wasn't fully inverted yet until more recently. And now it seems things are inverted. Evil is good, good is evil, right is wrong, wrong is right. People that are trying to defend themselves are the aggressors, and the victimized are the oppressors. And there are enough people going along with this and believe this, that it has some currency out there. And then you add on the social media element to it, and it just all goes viral. And it feels like we're living in a very different world. So what advice in that environment do you give to students? You were one of them, active. You've made a huge impact with the Title VI reform. What do you tell kids today that are going to college? They feel maybe unsafe, uncomfortable, unwelcome, whatever.
There's a couple of different levels. So first off, I always talk about actual physical safety. For students who feel physically unsafe, you have to contact campus security. You have to tell them that you're not feeling safe. At NYU, at one point, they even gave me a security escort to one of my classes that I didn't feel safe in. You have a right to security. You have a right to safety. Jewish student centers have a right to security and safety. So when it comes to your physical safety, be smart about it. Also, I'm the biggest proud Jew you'll ever see. I wear my Magen David, but if you're feeling unsafe, it's okay to wear a baseball cap, and it's okay to hide the Magen David. There's a line between being prideful and being stupid. So you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Hiding a Magen David doesn't make you a worse Jew. Of course, I'm a very big go out there and be proud, because that's how you fight anti-Semitism. Sure, but we'd rather have you safe than have you living in fear. So that's in terms of the physical safety. In terms of the safety between classmates, and then the safety on social media, again, because they're different levels. Safety between classmates is, I think, the hardest entirely, because there's one thing for the adults, for example, who are seeing all this hate on social media and maybe in the streets of New York. It's something completely different for students who are seeing what their classmates are posting on social media, and then they have to sit next to them in an hour and 15 lecture, 2 times a week, knowing what it is that they're posting, right? So that makes it much harder. I would say for students, definitely take a step back and recognize what kind of person are you dealing with, right? Are you dealing with a diehard? I call them the hardliners. Or are you dealing with a human rightser? And we've talked about this at SVA, and we talked about this on the other live, where there's 2 types of protesters right now. There's people who are hardliners, and they're people whose minds are not going to change. They either have a personal connection to the conflict, or they believe that they're so marginalized that they feel like they have a personal connection to the conflict when they actually don't. You will not change them. Or we're talking Queers for Palestine. We're talking people who are in the OG Students for Justice in Palestine. And we're talking to people who are Jewish Voice for Peace, which is a whole different topic. Jewish people who deny their own right to self-determination, and that way have become the biggest obstacle for the broader Jewish community, for 94% of the Jewish community. If you're dealing with one of those, let it be. If you're dealing with one of those, you can let campus security know who they are and why you feel unsafe. You want to avoid them. If you see them protesting outside, it's not worth approaching. It's not worth counter-protest. Like, you just walk on by. They're not worth your time. But if they're the human rightsers, and we're talking usually about, these are usually like white women that are left-leaning, usually. they're just well-meaning kids. They're the ones that would have shared the Bella Hadid post. They, you know, follow influencers. They love Taylor Swift. Very normal, very nice girls, sure. They just want peace. They want to bake a cake full of rainbows and sunshine and for everyone to be okay. And for them, the words ceasefire are very appealing because ceasefire sounds like peace to me, right? Well, why won't Israel just cease fire? And it's very hard to have a conversation where you're trying to explain why a ceasefire doesn't mean what you think it means. I would focus on the human rightsers.
Yes.
I'd focus on the human rightsers, and I would focus on individual conversations with the human rightsers. If you could do it in person, better than doing it online, because doing it online, they never want to be caught, right? Because they feel embarrassed when they're called out. These aren't people who are going to get angry when they're called out. They're going to feel embarrassed, and they're going to start looking up articles, which will be self-serving, being like, but isn't blah, 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 and start throwing talking points from articles at you. If you have the conversation in person, you're also at the same time showing them how little they actually know about it and how knowledgeable you're coming in at it, because you're explaining things without giving them the opportunity to find self-serving articles to back up what it is that they think they know when they actually don't. So focus on human rightsers. Talk to them in person if you can, if you think you can actually change them, and if you value the friendship. If you don't, then don't focus on them. Then it's not worth it. If it's like a random girl in your class that you probably haven't spoken to and you probably won't, let it be. Let her believe what she believes. I believe, like, yes, we could change the world with a conversation. Right now, you have bigger fish to fry. In terms of online safety, I don't believe getting into it in the comments with anyone is worth it. I think the only time it's worth commenting on a post is when you're clarifying something or when you're highlighting something about it, right? So, for example, I posted a video where people had signs that said ceasefire, and at the same time they were chanting Intifada. And people were commenting, and I ended up making a post about this afterwards, saying, isn't it ironic that you're calling for a ceasefire and for Intifada at the same time? That's a great thing to point out. Because when people go to the comments, they want to see, if you have something important to call out, put that in the comments. If you're fighting with someone in the comments, it's not worth your time. You're not going to change their mind. They're going to be Googling articles on the side. So that's my advice in terms of like safety.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, and it's interesting to think about your point of who you're talking to. Is this a dyed-in-the-wool extremist that there's no changing their mind, and it's a different approach depending on who you're talking to, and to also think about whether or not you're trying to change their mind or the other people that are listening around you, right? Sometimes you may not be worth, this particular person may not be worth debating, but there are enough people listening to that debate and that you might be able to. It brings me to another point I'm thinking about, and it's something that we talk about with the youth, and I think you'd be the perfect person to address, because I think you've been both these people. I'm taking a chance here, but we tell our kids that are going off to college, like, your job in college is to get an education. Your job is not to solve the Israel-Palestine conflict. And I think for some kids, it's a lot of pressure when they feel like they're going off, and then even in the terms that it's often framed, is it, it's a battle, it's a war, and it's metaphorical, obviously, but not everybody is up for that. And I think they need to know that that's okay, that you don't need to be the vanguard of Israel advocacy and Zionism on campus. Your first goal is to be safe and to get an education. If you're inclined to become an activist, however, these are the ways you could do it safely. And I think that your personal journey, you went through both those phases, right? And early on, you were not up for really diving in necessarily full force. And then you got to the point where, like, I can't take this anymore. And you decided to take that next leap. So hearing from someone who went through it and hearing them, that permission to kind of be how you're comfortable to be at campus, I think is important for the youth.
Yeah, 100%.
To hear. If you could
So
just address it.
I don't believe in the idea that your silence is deafening, right? You hear that all the time, and you're seeing this on social media, especially with celebrities, where people are like calling out people for having been silent. When it comes to celebrities, and then I'll get back to students. When it comes to celebrities, I have a friend that said it very well. If you don't know something about something and you're taking a stance because people are pressuring you to, honestly, don't take a stance. Don't take a stance. I would much rather have the celebrities who have been posting idiotic things about the conflict, I would have rather they kept their mouth shut than post something that they can't defend. And that's true for our side too. Like for example, everyone's been calling out Selena Gomez because she's the most followed woman on Instagram because she hasn't taken a stance yet. People in the Palestinian side and on the Jewish and Israeli side, people all over in her comments are like, you've been awfully quiet. Take a stand. Why does it matter why do you need Selena Gomez to take a stand? And actually, I think it's smart of Selena Gomez not to take a stand, because then that way, you know, inshallah BH, when all this is over, she didn't make a stupid mistake. Like, you know, because if we're talking numbers, they have more numbers. If we're talking morality, we have more morality. Who knows where it's going to fall
Right.
out? I think that if you don't know what to say, don't speak on it. And now going back to students, like you said, yes, I was that person. I did not want to be involved. This wasn't my fight necessarily. I didn't even want to be so involved in the Jewish world. I wanted to make non-Jewish friends. That was my goal. And like we spoke about a lot at SEA, I realized that this is my fight, and I don't need to look for a cause to fight for if I already have my own. And I made the decision to get fully involved again. Yes. And I hopped back in, and then I hopped out after it became too intense for me. And then, you know, I hopped back in when it was time to file my lawsuit, because they gave an award to a group that should not be getting awarded, right? If this is not your fight, then you don't have to be fighting on the front lines. If we're going to use the metaphor that this is a war, understand an army has many components. It has people in intelligence, it has people who are moral support, it has people who are doing civil service, it has people who are monitoring the streets, it has people who are monitoring computers, it has people who are watching checkpoints. Everyone has a different job and a different task. And the Israeli army itself will tell you they have as many administrative roles, if not more, than they do on the front lines. So if you are not a frontline fighter, you don't have to be. Number one, fundraisers. Fundraisers are a great way to not be on the front lines. You don't have to be debating Students for Justice in Palestine on your campus. You don't even have to be planning the fundraiser. But going to the fundraiser in and of itself, that itself is standing up. If you have something that you're passionate about, let's say, for example, you like mobilizing people and you want to say like, okay, like let's do a drive, let's donate socks and let's send them to the soldiers. Great, do that. If you love art, you make an art piece that speaks to you and you want to share it. Great. Let's say you make an art piece that speaks to you and you don't want to share it necessarily, but you want to give it to a synagogue or you want to send it. Great. There's so many ways to be part of this and to feel like you're helping because you are in a way without being on the front lines and battling people on social media or on campus. And that's something that I've always believed to be true. I always say like, find your strength and then do your strength. Become the best at what you're already good at. You don't have to turn into a different kind of warrior. You know, if we start taking people from intelligence and putting them in infantry, we're going to have a horrible time.
Right. Great message. Okay. So you just got back, you were on the World Jewish Congress mission, right? I think it was a 48-hour mission. You made visits to the South, some of the worst hit areas. You met with people that have been directly affected with it. I'm sure it was a very emotional trip, not an easy one. Tell me how that came about. Why did you decide to go, and what did you learn when you were over there?
On Wednesday, I got a call from the World Jewish Congress that they were putting together a young delegation of what they call their Jewish Diplomatic Corps. We are young professionals around the world, an advocacy mission to Israel. I thought about it. I spoke to my mom about it. We weighed safety concerns, everything, and ultimately I decided to go. And Saturday night I was on a flight to Israel. We landed Sunday, and it was really a life-changing trip. I've been on a lot of trips. I've been on mission trips before. This is something I've never seen before. I've never experienced anything like this before. And the people I met really were like, we were strangers. I knew maybe one or two of them. We were about 15 people, 16 people. I knew a couple of them before, like literally one or two. And you walk in with these complete strangers into one of the most emotionally traumatic experiences to witness things that we should never have to witness. And then you walk out and you're expected to go home and to continue about your life. And every single one of us were different. Like this wasn't like an influencer trip. It's every single one of us is what they call a change maker. And we're all change makers in our own way. And everyone's going to take what we learned and advocate in different ways back in their home communities.
So it sounds like a pretty solid group to go with. I'm sure you all, you came very close through the process when you go through something traumatic like that. And so tell me about the people you met along the way and what the purpose of the mission was and what you felt like you want people here to know.
We did a lot. The first thing we did was we got there and we were having a dinner just to get to know each other. And all the way at the start of the dinner, within being with these people for 25 minutes, the sirens started going off and we said, okay. The Israelis just like sprung up and they started like, walking to the shelter, and all the Americans and internationals, we ended up having, I think we were like 16 people from 7 different countries represented. I think a little bit more, I think 8, because we had someone from Germany join too. It was and not everyone was Jewish, by the way. We had 3 people who were not Jewish who came on this trip who have been amazing voices for Israel. So we all, made our way to the shelter, the stairwell that's inside that doubled as a shelter, and we waited, and then we got back to the dinner, and then all the way at the end of the dinner, right before we had dessert, again the sirens went off, and again we're all in the stairwell, and so are the waiters, right? It's chaotic, but in Israel it didn't feel chaotic. It felt everyone else around us was calm, and then we were the ones that were chaotic, because this is something that we don't live with. This is a reality we don't have. And that was like the first difference I saw, where it was like people in Israel really are built differently, where they have a certain reality where it's like, oh, the sirens, okay, and let's go. And with us, like, we're looking at the window like idiots, and they're like, get in the shelter. We're like, oh, okay, yeah,
Yes, totally. Yeah. I was there with my family when it started on Saturday morning. And so, we experienced the alarms in Tel Aviv and going to the bomb shelters and the whole thing. And yeah, there's definitely a marked difference between the tourists and the Israelis. But one of my takeaways from that was how it really is something. I mean, it's something getting rockets launched at you, and you understand how it could be somewhat traumatic. But at the same time, it's become almost it's an unacceptable but almost everyday way of life for some communities in Israel. And it's like, oh, well, the Iron Dome intercepts it, and so it's disruptive to life, normal life, let's say. But it's really so much more than that. It's, when you're there and you're experiencing it, and I was there with my 15-year-old daughter, and I see others, even younger kids, like, this is so not okay that even one rocket should be fired into Israel. Each one, we should remember, is a war crime. And they're sending thousands of them on a regular basis. So I think it's important to remind ourselves and we should never get used to that being anything like normal.
And I'm in a group chat that I've been in, and whenever I'm in the US, it's called like Israel Attack Updates. And I've been in this chat for over 2 years, and anytime there's a rocket fired into Israel, they would send out a blast like, hey, this just happened, that happened. It's where I get a lot of my live updates from. And while we were making our way to the bunker, I get a text in this group chat saying like, dozens of rockets fired over Tel Aviv. And I was like, oh, and they sent like a little screenshot of it. And I'm like, that's where I am. Okay. So it's weird, because I've been getting these texts for the last 2 years. Now suddenly I'm in Israel on my way to the bunker, and I'm like, oh, no, duh. Yeah. The sirens just went off, and I'm on my way to the bunker. So yeah, it was again, definitely an experience. So that was my very first day. That was our welcome for this delegation. And then the second day was the hardest. And then the third day was harder than that. So the first full day that we did was to Kfar Aza. Now, for the people who are listening who don't know, Kfar Aza is one of the kibbutzim that was hit hardest. It was attacked, one of the very first ones, at 6:30 in the morning. And we're talking like the most brutal form of attacks. And they showed us, actually, the way that they came in was by just coming in. There is no security. The gates were off because it's the holiday. There was really no one checking. It's 6:30 in the morning, and they really just drove in. And the cars that they came in actually had medical permits to leave Gaza for hospitals. So Israel had issued medical permits, and these cars are leaving Gaza into Israel, and they use their medical permits in order to travel freely in Israel to wage terror. So they showed us that. And then the trucks, on top of the trucks, they had ATVs. So people came on trucks, ATVs, and that's it. It was a frenzy. It was a free for all. It was really barbaric. When you think of medieval times, and you think of pillaging, and you think of people who would show up to a village and burn it and kill the people and take them hostage, like, that's exactly what this was. It was a barbaric and medieval form of warfare that we don't see anymore. When we hear terrorism, and this is something that I've been talking about a lot, when we hear terrorism, we think of bombs and missiles and rockets. Yes, maybe we'll think of chemical attacks. We do not think of people walking into homes and starting to shoot people, taking like shovels and just brutally beating people. We don't think of that. And what we walked through, so Kfar Aza was definitely the hardest, because it's a village, it's a town, it's a kibbutz, stopped in time. And you walk in, there's military presence. We had to do protective gear. We had to wear everything. Most of their shelters are not viable anymore. They were either burned or exploded or turned over, and they gave us helmets and everything, and they're like, look, in case of emergency, we'll show you if there's a shelter nearby. If not, you just get on the floor and you put your hands on your head. And that was definitely, like, unnerving in and of itself. But walking through, you just see everything's destroyed. After the terrorists left, regular people made their way, like regular Gazans made their way into Kfar Aza. It's right next to the border, and just started looting things, everything, medicine cabinets, closets, shoes. You see everything just thrown about, people's lives entirely in disarray. And, we really we got to walk through, and we had free reign. So at one point I did walk into a house, and you realize it's someone's house. I think it's someone's home. I've never been on the March of the Living, but it's one of those things that I was walking through. I know what happened here, but I could still smell it, because you could still smell the dust. You could smell rancid food from all the refrigerators that were left over and knocked over. You could still see, on the rocks just lining up near the houses, saw spackle of blood on each one. It was really something horrific. It was really horrific. And what made it worse was that the next day we spoke to people from Kfar Aza. We went to a different kibbutz that's been housing them for the last 4 weeks, and they told you their stories, and we saw the way their houses are laid out, and basically they told you that when everything happened, obviously the first couple of houses that were hit, people were just brutally murdered until people were able to, the other people in the other houses woke up, got their bearings, and got their families into the shelters that are in the basements of their homes or in some back rooms. And they'll tell you how at first they thought it was going to be 2-3 hours. They said, oh, there's terrorists in Kfar Aza, and this isn't out. Of course, it's not common, but they thought, okay, there's 2 or 3 terrorists. How many times have we read headlines of 2 or 3 terrorists that make their way into a village and kill a family, right? They crawled in through the window and killed a family. That's what people expected. No one thought that it was hundreds.
Right, and it's usually in the West Bank somewhere,
exactly,
on a remote settlement.
And this is important.
Else.
Yes, this is in mainland Israel. Kfar Aza is mainland Israel, and they're mainly left-leaning. They're anti-Likud. They're very pro-peace. 2 of the people who are still currently kidnapped and held hostages in Kfar Aza are big peace activists who have posted in the past about the importance of bringing people together. There's I think his last name is Liebman. He was planning one of the first work programs with Gaza officially that would have, it was going to be an urban area with this work program to make sure that they have solidarity. It was going to be a solidarity cross project that obviously ended up failing, and he ended up dying on October 7th too, this visionary for peace. So no one asked these people, it's not like you can make the argument, well, these were settlers. No, they're in mainland Israel, and they're actually standing up for Gazans, but the Gazans didn't ask. It's kind of like in the Holocaust, we say it doesn't matter whether or not you thought you were Jewish or you identified as a Jew is a Jew. That's exactly what happened in this case. It doesn't matter if you were one of the good Jews. It doesn't matter if you were one of those queers for Palestine. End of the day, you were killed. And same thing with the music festival. Half of the people, not half, but a good amount of the people that they kidnapped weren't even Israeli citizens. They were people who were there for a music festival.
Right.
So it was definitely hard. And it was hard to hear them say, well, we were in the shelter for 30 hours and we heard Arabic outside of the home. And at that point, we were going on hour 10 without water. And my husband decided to be the one that was going to leave the safe room into the kitchen just to grab water for the children. Things like that. And they'll tell you stories of people who like going out of the safe room. That was let's hug, let's say goodbye, and let's go out of the safe room. They'll tell you how they were texting with other people who still live in Kfar Aza, with their cousins, with their aunts and uncles, and how they would get a text I hear the terrorists outside. They just entered. And then every other message they sent after that was unread. So you have the time that people had to stop answering. It really was. It's something I can't explain the things that I saw, and I can't explain the things that I heard.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it was at a scale and a level of barbarity that we should never be able to get our mind around. I don't think normal people should be able to understand it. It's just beyond anything we imagine. And it's true. You think about a suicide bomber, bad enough. You think about a shooting, but this was like a crime of passion that was overkill. They just couldn't stop. And there were even, Thai nationals and French nationals, and there were Arabs, there were Jews, there were Christians, Muslims. They just were on a bloodthirsty rampage that wouldn't have stopped unless the army eventually got there and stopped them. They needed to be physically stopped. It makes you wonder about what the future could look like when you have this element, so close. How viable really peace is if you become so indoctrinated that something like that is even not only possible, but the level of how wide the ring around them is of people that either actively support them or tacitly are okay with it going down like that makes it a pretty uninviting place to want to make peace. If you're inclined to do that, it's like with who, how how does this hold up? Is there a sense of hopelessness amongst these people now that you met with in terms of what the future looks like, peace, process,
I have
states?
to say the
What's the
vibe
vibe?
is very Israeli, which is like, yalla, let's go, right? So while we're seeing all of
Right.
this, at one point we ended up going to this office building, and they take us down to the parking lot underground, and the whole underground parking lot is now a giant warehouse full of things, and they've ran these giant donation drives throughout all of Israel. People donating books, toys, strollers, things for Shiva, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
low level chairs and cushions, just all of Israel donating whatever they could. And you have thousands of people who left their jobs, who are
Mm-hmm.
volunteering, sorting things out into piles, arranging the toys by age order, and getting a list of families that need things. And the same thing, like when you speak to the survivors of Kfar Aza, they'll tell you, well, when we left, we left with nothing. We didn't have any clothes, not for us, not for our babies, not for our kids, not for anything, no pet food, just the most basic things. When they were escorted out of their homes by the IDF because they were being rescued, the bodies still hadn't been cleared out. They had to shield their kids' eyes as they were walking out of their own homes. And then they were put on trains, and then they were taken to one section, and they were taken to another section. They were taken to another hotel until finally they took them to Shafarim, where they've been for the last 3.5 weeks. And all of Israel just got together. It was like a yalla, let's go. So I wouldn't say hope.
Mm-hmm.
I see resilience and I see action, which again, I think is something very Israeli. I think collectively as a people, they haven't processed what happened. They haven't had time to be angry. They haven't had time to
Mm-hmm.
be sad. I think that they only have time for action. And that's exactly what we've been seeing there, or what I saw on the ground, speaking to everyone. Like I was talking to some of the survivors, and they seemed awfully calm. And again, it wasn't hope. It was more
Yeah.
like okay, yalla, let's go. So what are we doing about this? Let's go. They're in a phase.
Right. They're in a phase. They're in a response phase. We're working with
Mm.
an organization called Natal, which does frontline trauma psychological work with soldiers. They run the big hotline in Israel, and they work with the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Health and whatever. And I've also spoken to some individual soldiers that lost a lot of people in the unit, and although there's this tremendous influx of people into the system looking for therapy because of this trauma, there's also a lot of people that haven't even started. I mean, you have guys in the Army that half their unit is missing, and they're fighting and they're still deployed. And I've spoken to them, and they're not thinking about it yet, but they're going to. There's going to be a time when all of this is going to, I guess it's sort of like almost like, if you should know from this, but when you sit Shiva, people come and they keep you busy and you go through that process. But when when all those people go home after a week and you're just there by yourself or with your family, you enter a different phase of it where you're processing things on a different level. And I think as not only in Israel, but here also to a lesser extent, but our whole nation as a Jewish people is kind of going to go through a number of phases of grief through this. So it's going to require different levels of support, and it's going to be a long road for us feeling a sense again of real security, I think. So I want to I don't want to keep you too long. I know you literally just got home. Thank you for doing this. I want to turn back to college campuses for a second. So parents and kids are wondering, do I belong going to colleges anymore? Should I just go to YU? Should I skip it altogether? Should I just take online classes? And it's something that, at the SCA we talk about all the time. And I think that there's a danger in ceding that to elements that are against us and really seek our destruction. I think that at the same time, there are real reasons to say, why do I want to be exposed to this?
Yeah, so I've
How do you
spoken
think
about
about it?
this at SEA, and you and I think very similarly. I think obviously physical safety comes first, yes. But if I had advice, if I had a child right now, I would be sending my child to NYU, to Berkeley, to Columbia, to all of the hot button schools. Not because I want them to have a difficult time, not because I want them to have a fight, but because we currently have a seat at the table, no matter how small. And I think that seat is extremely important, because we can't let other people decide where a Jew can and cannot feel comfortable. If we think that Columbia is anti-Semitic now, if we think Berkeley is anti-Semitic now, imagine how it would be without a single Jew, right? If we didn't have anyone there to even just like look him in the eye and say, did you just say what I think you said? Osama bin Laden was a terrorist, right? If we don't have that voice pushing back, then we have nothing. And we're ceding all of that territory. Just because a battleground is hard doesn't mean that it's time to retreat.
Yeah.
Maybe it's time to regroup, and maybe it's time to come in with strategy. So I think something like SEA, for example, boot campus, that prepares high school students to go into college, that's exactly what we should be doing. We should be sending our kids to colleges. We shouldn't let them feel afraid. We should send them in equipped. You don't send people into a battle zone without equipment, and that's exactly what we're doing here. So I think, again, yes, like if you, the one thing I will say is that if anything has opened my eyes, it's that college is a sham, right? College is stupid. If you're going to go and study something that you're not going to do anything with it, then don't study it at all. And I think it's a matter of semantics. Here in the US, you say, well, what's your major, right? In Mexico, we don't have a word for major. The word is career. So you go to college to study a career, and they say, what's your career? So when I was studying Middle Eastern diaspora structures or Middle Eastern studies, my family in Mexico would say, oh, no way, you're at NYU. What's your career? And I would say, Middle Eastern diaspora structures. And they would say, that's your career, because there's no profession attached to it, right?
Right. Are you gonna open a Middle Eastern diaspora store, a chain of
what are you
retail
doing
stores?
with that?
Right.
So,
What are you
so
doing?
my advice is before you go to college,
Right.
yes, college is a place to learn, and you can always take electives, but take some sort of vocational profession. If you want to go into med, if you want to go into law, if you want to go into anything specific, if you want to be a journalist and take journalism, like you shouldn't just be going to get a degree. If your purpose in college is to get a degree, get an associate's degree and move forward, because you're not going to be getting anything out of college other than liberal arts education unless you're seeking something specific. Seek a vocation. That's my advice, number one. Number two is, once you are there and you are taking those electives, let's say you're taking a documentary filmmaking elective and they're doing the Palestinian films of resistance, then maybe it's time that you make documentary about the Sephardic community and about our stories, right? You fight within the same lines that they're giving you. They're giving you the parameters, you fight within. And I think that that's the way that we should be doing it. And I think that right now students are being mobilized in a way I've never seen. My phone's blowing up every time I do, especially like a live like this. My inbox, and I know this is going to happen as soon as I X out, it's going to be full of people saying, my daughter is at X school, my cousin's at X school, I'm at X school, this has been happening, how can I sue, what options do I have, what do you recommend? I honestly should just do a live specifically that's just boom, boom, boom Q&A, and people could just ask me all at the same time. And I should just get it all over with, because it's very hard for me to talk to everyone. So what I will say to everyone listening, if you're having issues with anti-Semitism, which I know that you are on your college campus, reach out to the Lawfare Project, reach out to the Brandeis Center. Both of them helped me a lot during my lawsuit. Both of them helped me after my lawsuit. I've spoken on panels with both Brandeis Center and Lawfare Project. They are phenomenal organizations. I'm not a lawyer yet. What I could do is I could walk you through the process, and I can maybe tell you preliminarily whether you have a case. But at the end of the day, I'm not a lawyer yet. I'm going to be volunteering with both of those organizations. Hopefully, I'll be able to work with you guys once I am a lawyer. But right now, like I can tell you what it is that you should do, but I can't file a complaint, right? I'm not a lawyer. I haven't taken the bar. So yeah, students, it's a hard place right now. And if you can organize collective action suits, do that, right? There's a lot of great ways right now that you could be doing things, but don't just be like, okay, like I throw my towel in, I'm flipping the table over and I'm walking away. No. Sit at that table and say, I belong at this table, and I'm going to stay at this table, and I'm going to push back on everything you've been trying to feed me.
I think that's great advice about how to think about going to college, that you should have something in mind, or at least plan on learning a hard skill, let's say, or something you plan on doing something with. And if not, let's remember there are plenty of other ways to be educated and to continue your education, whether it be associate's degree or online courses or taking classes you're just interested in, how you want, when you want. There's so many other options today that just because you're not in a collegiate setting doesn't mean it's the end of your education. If you want to just become more well-rounded and look for liberal arts classes, there's lots of ways of doing that. In terms of resources, at the SCA.com, we have a resource page that has links to the Lawfare Project. You can report an incident that'll be reviewed by Gita Kaplan. If it makes any sense, we'll call Lawfare, or we'll call you, Adela, and we'll figure out what to do with them if there is a case. But I think that's all great advice. You always have a wonderful perspective. You always say yes when we ask you for something for not just our organization, by the way, the community in general, many different organizations. And we really appreciate it, because the experience you've had, the activism that you've done is unique. And I think you're a terrific role model for the young adults today. So thank you for joining us. And If you have any last things you
Of
want to
course,
say
I'd say
before we
my
sign
closing
off.
thought is people always ask me how I came to be this way. And I always say it's because I had a Sephardic Jewish education. We are privileged beyond privileged to have grown up in the community that we did. And that, number one, we're strong in our Jewish identity. We know our heritage and we know that we're Zionist. I never had to question any of those things growing up. I had an education. Maybe I didn't have an SCA boot campus. I didn't have that. And now we have that. And that's phenomenal. But it's one of those things
Mm-hmm.
have community because a lot of other
Okay.
Jewish people, let's say
Mm-hmm.
Russian Jews or whatever it is, they grow up maybe near Jews, but they don't have community the way that we do. So the reason why I always say yes to every community event anytime, Propel, SEA, whatever it is, whoever reaches out, I say yes
Yeah.
because this community built me and I want to continue to give back. So if you're a member of this community, you should be very proud and you should know that we're all in each other's hands and those are good hands to be in.
Fantastic. Okay.
Thank you.
Great way to end. Welcome back. I'm glad you're back safe and you had a
I'm sure
meaningful
we'll be
trip. And
in touch.
I'm
Bye,
sure
everyone.
we'll be
Thank you
in
for
touch.
tuning in.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay.